Thank you, everybody, for tuning in for another episode of the Amicable Divorce Network podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Ann Moore-Grant. I'm the founder of the Amicable Divorce Network, and we are in season 2 of the podcast, where we are talking about each chapter of our book, Divorce Amicably, Your Roadmap to Resolution, How to Save Time, Money, and Your Sanity Through Divorce. And today I am joined by one of our members and authors of the book, Kathleen Shack, and she is a mental health professional in Georgia. And we're talking today about having a child-centered divorce. Thank you for joining me, Kathleen.
Thanks for having me.
So I have found that a lot of people want to have a child-centered divorce. They will say that to me as a divorce attorney in their meeting, and then they make crazy decisions in their case. So we have to reflect back on that. But for people listening, what actually is a child-centered divorce? What does that mean?
Generally, a child-centered divorce is making sure that you're putting the children's best interests and their health and their needs above your own interests and needs or wants that you have. So it's making sure that you're creating a stable environment for them and making sure that you're truly looking at developmentally, what do my children need at this time in their lives? How can we make sure we're making plans for them as they're getting older and going through different developmental stages? Making sure that you're open to sharing and co-parenting with the other parent, realizing that the other parent has as much desire and need and rights to be able to have time with the children as you do. And sometimes that can be hard for people when they're really upset with each other to be open to really dividing the time with the kids. But that's really what the children need, is lots of contact with both parents, as long as both parents are healthy and in a place to be able to do that.
Yeah, I think something I find people really struggle with is if they were more the primary parents, or they view themselves that way, maybe it's not even really the case during the marriage, that they really struggle with sharing time, holidays, decision-making now with the other person. It sometimes is surprising to them that they would have to, do these things. But I guess touch on a little bit why that contact with both parents is good for children. Why is that healthy? Why is that important?
Yeah, children need to have a stable sense of belonging in the world, and they need to have that stable sense of connection. And so when they're really little, that's when they're doing the main bonding with their parents. And then they're also looking to their parents for a sense of security and for the idea that things are going to be okay, that their parents are going to figure things out and keep them safe and stable and secure. And that's just where they form their view of the world and what is going to be okay going forward. And they need both parents' input on that. They need to know, how would a dad handle this kind of a situation? How would a mom handle this kind of a situation? They're going to get emotional support from both parents, even if it might look completely different from how they get it from the other parent. So they really need to be able to count on and depend on both parents and know that their parents are going to be there no matter what.
Yeah. And kids understand that they are both parents' child.
Right.
And so I think something I see that really hurts kids is when one parent criticizes the other and says negative things about them, because the child hears that sort of half of them is bad. So, I mean, do you see that with, kids, or how that is playing out maybe when the child becomes an adult?
I definitely see that. And if there's high conflict in a divorce or even post-divorce in the family going forward, that's the number one predictor of kids not doing well and kids being more in the high risk category of acting out or making poor decisions or doing badly in school, not having healthy relationships going forward. So you really want to be looking at trying to minimize the conflict and be able to show the kids that both parents are able to be loved, both parents are okay to talk about in both homes, that every part of that child is lovable and acceptable, and that there's unconditional love there for the kids. And sometimes that goes into having to be polite and bite your tongue a lot when it comes to talking about your ex-spouse. But it's so important because the kids need to know that those people are loved and accepted as well.
And I think something people don't think about is when kids are little, like before they start going to school, or even, once they're, kindergarten, first grade, their whole world is their home. So
Yeah.
when they come to your home, the only thing they have to talk about is the other parent. Mommy made mac and cheese for dinner. We watched this show. Mommy got a flat tire, whatever it is. That's their
Yeah.
whole world. They don't go to a job. They don't, go and have anything else to talk about. And so that could be very triggering to the other parent. But that's one of those situations where that sounds great. I hope everything is okay. You just need to understand that's their whole world and they're sharing their world with you. And you might just have to bite your tongue and be quiet for a little bit.
Right. And especially with little kids, they
Mhm.
often want to have a picture of their other
Yes.
parent
And they
at
should.
their house
Mhm.
and things like that. So I think it's really important that parents be able to put themselves on the back burner and recognize, okay, my child needs this. My child needs that sense of connection, even when they're in a different house, to know that they're still bonded to that other person.
Yeah. And how would you want, I guess, if the child was talking about you in the other home or wanted to have a picture up, how would you want the other parent to handle that? You would want that same level of respect.
Right.
And what I hear from people a lot is, oh, well, the other parent is terrible. They badmouth me. They would rip up a picture. They would do these things. And I'm just like, let them. As the child gets older and is, developing, they will see the healthy boundaries, the healthy behavior that you had, as opposed to how the other parent acted. And you can only control your half and make your half as best as possible.
Right. Yeah. And oftentimes you want to keep in mind that you want to take the high road when it comes to the kids, and you want to be the healthy example. And so, yeah, you're right. No matter what that other half is doing, you want to be the example that the child is really going to look up to and respect and admire later in life when they look back on how their childhood went and how they're bonded and connected. So I always encourage clients, if the other person is not going to be nice and not handle things well, that's on them. The children are going to read that. They're going to see it, and they're going to decide what kind of relationship they want with that person going forward. You don't have to contribute to the damage, because then the kids also start to resent you if you contribute to the downfall of the other person.
Right. And I always try to focus clients when we're particularly in a mediation or a negotiation, that when you're making a decision, look at it from the child's perspective.
Right.
And for some reason, I see this particular situation over and over again. And that is where one parent is very passionate about a particular holiday. And I'm going to use Halloween as an example because I've seen that from time to time. It could be, 4th of July or something like that. And they might say, I love Halloween. I am a spooky person. I am very much into dressing up and decorating the house and, doing all of these different things. And I want to share that with my child. But the kid may like that, may not like that, but maybe to execute that so that you get to have the child every year or every other year on Halloween, which could be a Wednesday and a school night. They have to, drive 45 minutes after school and transport a costume and do all of the things that actually make that event then not fun for the children. And so I try to, walk them through what would that day look like for your child.
Yeah.
You can be as spooky as you want to be over here and hang up cobwebs and stuff. It doesn't diminish your joy of that day, but think about that. As well as people who want to split major holidays, like for example, Christmas Day, and they want to exchange at noon, but they have to drive 3 hours to do it. So now the child is in the car on Christmas, for so many hours. Think about those things. Don't think about yourself that you want to have the child on Halloween. Think about what the child's experience will be.
Right. Another thing I see there is parents' birthdays.
Yes.
So oftentimes I have parents sitting in mediation or sitting in a co-parenting session arguing about wanting the children on the parent's birthday. So I try to remind them, like, that probably just needs to be a regular day on your schedule, because this is your birthday, your special day. And your kids just need to be able to be doing their homework or doing whatever their day is and not having to rearrange their lives for that day. So I really encourage parents to just let that be a normal scheduled day and not fight for like every tiny day that they could possibly have some time with their kids, because it is very disruptive at times, and it's not something that the child is necessarily interested in doing. I also make sure that parents think about how once you're in a divorced family, holidays don't necessarily have to be celebrated on the day that they actually are.
Yeah.
So if you have Christmas or Halloween or a birthday and you're able to celebrate it anywhere near that time with your child, it's going to be just as meaningful for that child if it's on Saturday versus if it was on Wednesday. So divorced families have to get used to, a lot of times holidays don't happen on the actual day that it says on the calendar, and that's okay.
Yeah. And people get hyper focused on that. I agree with you. And just as an adult, I don't even remember what I did last Wednesday. So I definitely don't remember, like, did I celebrate this on this day?
Right.
You know, so sometimes I try to ask people, oh, well, what day of the week was your birthday last year? I couldn't tell you. I couldn't answer that question. And as a blended family myself, you know, if I look back, did we have the children that year on Christmas? Did we have them on Thanksgiving? Like, I would have to look back at a calendar to even figure that out. So the day doesn't matter. What really matters is the memories that you're making, the positivity of that event. But not, you know, if the kids feel conflict and tension, then, you know, that holiday and that event is ruined, you know. But if you just had a fun time, they aren't going to remember what day of the week it is, or if it was on the holiday. I promise, as an adult, you will absolutely not remember. You won't remember why you walked in a room anymore. So you're not going to remember what day you celebrated that on. You know, so really focus more on making a fun and memorable and meaningful time, and stop focusing so much on the day on the calendar. It just doesn't matter in the long run.
Exactly. Yeah. Speaking of calendars, one thing that's really important for little kids is that they have a color-coded calendar in each parent's house. So to have that on the refrigerator, have it in their backpack for school, but having a color-coded calendar helps little kids in particular keep track of when they're going to be at which parent's house. And that helps them also feel important because they have their own little calendar that has their little schedules on it. And they like being able just to go look at that any time of day.
Yeah.
And that also helps the parents too, because they're not answering the same question 10 times a day about what the calendar is going to be looking like.
Exactly. And it is good for the teacher. They can look at that. And then, you know, sometimes kids get embarrassed. Like if they are asked, like, is mommy or, you know, whoever's picking you up today, then they're like, I just got called out as a child of divorce, and they were embarrassed. So then that sort of cuts that down. Something else I've had clients do is to put a different tag on the child's backpack, you know, so that they can look over and, you know, maybe it's something very innocuous, like their favorite movie with their mom is the character on that backpack that day, or, you know, whatever for their dad, and come up with something fun for that. So, because kids do forget, and you don't want that to be a source of anxiety.
Yeah.
And so a visual cue for a younger child and their teacher is very appreciated, because teachers also don't want to be put in the middle of what the schedule is. So.
Right.
Any other tips for people that want to have a child-centered divorce?
I think in terms of older children, it's important that you still shield them from all of the conflict and all the details about the divorce, and that you don't lean on them emotionally. The older kids in particular need you to be in charge of your own life and be in charge of all the details. They do not want the pressure of selecting who they're going to stay with. They don't want the pressure of having it be flexible, that they can just go whenever they want to. They want there to be a schedule that the parents figured out, that they adhere to, and they don't want to have to pick favorites. They definitely don't want to be your emotional support. So try to shield them from all the information that's going on. Fill them in when it's important, and then they need an update. But even adult kids, like, you want to keep them out of all of the dirty details of the divorce, because they just need you guys to still be parents no matter how old you are and no matter how old they are, and just shield them from all that stuff.
And something to think about really is long term. Or kids will become adults. They may have children. You may become a grandparent. You don't want to have such a bad relationship with your co-parent that child has to have two different events. I mean, they're just not going to have the bandwidth for that. So if you're looking 10, 15, 20 years into the future, you want to be able to go to your grandchild's birthday party with this other person and not create a tense situation for your now adult child and your now grandchild. you want to be able to have that as a goal in the future, that you can have that level of relationship, because people grow and change, and you want to be forward focused.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else that you think that we should hit on for people to have a child-centered divorce?
I think you've got to really picture what message you want to give the kids. And so it's important to meet with a co-parenting counselor or meet with a child developmental specialist before you talk with the children about getting divorced, because there are certain ways to do that. And there are certain things that you want to keep in mind when you're doing that. But that's where your co-parenting role really starts with your partner, is how you guys sit down and tell the kids, and then how you guys continue whatever that is that you're telling them about the reasons for the divorce and how things are going to play out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's something I've seen some bad situations where one parent made an emotional decision to unilaterally tell the children. And that can just start everything off on a very bad foot. So if you can do so, meet with someone like Kathleen or a professional to determine what's best for your child and how to handle this. Because also every child is different,
Right.
particularly if they have anxiety or learning disabilities or autism or anything like that. You really need to handle this properly for their best interests. And so we always hope at the Amicable Divorce Network that people want to have a child-focused divorce. We train our professionals to really help their clients and focus them on that decision-making and educate them about what's best for children. And in the book, if you are really interested in more information on developmental things for children and more content on child-centered divorce, it is an entire chapter. Kathleen is one of our contributing editors for that, so you can jump in and get more information there. Kathleen, for people who are listening and they want to know how to work with you, what is the best way for them to reach you?
The best way to get a hold of me is my website, and that is mftga.com. Excuse me. And then my email is kathleen@mftga.com. And I'll get back with you the same day.
That's great. And if you're driving and listening to this, you can always check the show notes. You can always go to divorceamicably.com and find Kathleen's work and how to reach her there, and also in our membership directory at Divorce Amicably, as well as amicableddivorcenetwork.com. Kathleen, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome. Have a good one.